Hey, what's going on, guys? So, this is my first video in what I hope to be a new series on the new game that I've been working on for the past week and a half now. This game, it's an infinite scroller game where your character has to jump and avoid obstacles that will infinitely generate, and other enemies and obstacles they'll have to dodge and eventually get a high score. I really like playing games, and I also really enjoy making games. Specifically, I've been making games in the Unity game engine. One of my favorite game mechanics is jumping because it's such a classical game mechanic that's been used in so many different ways in so many different games. But not all jumps are the same. There are actually several different types of jumps. There's the basic jump that has been probably used the most, where on the input the player increases their height by a set amount. The next type of jump that is where, depending on how long the player pushes down the button, will affect how high the jump will go. And the mechanic that I am trying to incorporate it into my game is a variable height, as said before, combined with a downward velocity. The best example that I could find is the Google Dinosaur game, which is another infinite runner game where you have to dodge obstacles. I'd like to build on this specific mechanic and incorporate it with other mechanics. The type of game I'm trying to go for is a hyper-casual like game where the player will traverse infinitely generating platforms and dodge enemies and other obstacles in their terrain. While doing this, the player will be able to achieve a score depending on how long they can continuously play without dying, and throughout these obstacles, the player will be able to collect some type of currency that can then be used for upgrades, cosmetics, and other in-game purchases. I like this type of game model because it does very well, especially on mobile games. The game can be played over and over again, with the player constantly striving to get a better score with an increasing difficulty. So this type of game I really think would do quite well. In my new Unity scene, I will place placeholder sprites that I'll be able to work with until I begin drawing and designing sprites specifically for the game. But on these sprites, I will make a ground and a player, and on this player, I will attach Unity physics components such as a rigid body, Box Collider 2D, and finally I will create a script for the player, and in that script I can begin to start coding the code required to make the optimal jump. But before fully implementing and showing you guys the code that I wrote for a nice jump that follows the mechanics that I specified, I'd like to first describe the way I handled grounding. Grounding is the way how most games, especially platform-like games, identify whether or not the player can jump or whether or not the player is on the ground. And for the specific mechanic that I am trying to use, this is an essential part of it, because of the different movements that will have to happen while the character is in the air, whether they want to do a short jump or a long jump, or whether within any of those jumps they choose to accelerate back down to the ground. And this is done using the Unity physics overlap function, where a game object is placed, and that game object that is placed on the player will describe the position of a square or rectangle that will overlap with the ground and identify whether or not the character is on the ground. If the character is on the ground, this bool, which is a boolean, will return as true. If it is not on the ground, the boolean will return a value of false, and therefore you will know that the player is not touching the ground, and the functions that can be done while not touching the ground are now able to be executed. The code for just the basic jump is here, where the boolean jump request is equal to true, and because it is true, you will get the component of the player's rigid body. You will add a force that is a vector 2 in the upward direction, multiplied by the jump velocity value, and as a force mode.2D impulse, so it will be a constant speed instead of an acceleration. After that movement, you will set your jump request to false. Your grounded is false because you aren't on the ground, and your down request as false because you are currently still in the jump request. Then, to identify the ground, so whether or not you're overlapping or touching the ground, we have a vector 2 box center, which is equal to the game object grounder and its position, and isGrounded is equal to physics2d.overlapBox, which is we're overlapping the layer mask of the ground, is not equal to null. Therefore, the value is not a null value, which means that it will default as true. And all of this is done, of course, in the fixed update function, because we're dealing with physics as opposed to just the normal update function. Now that we have the basic jump implemented, we can add the mechanics for going down and also for the variable jump. This is seen in the code here, where we are still in the void fixed update, and in this we are declaring the different situations where the player would have to go down, or where the player is still up in the air, or if the player has depressed slightly the up button and therefore won't do a full jump, but a mid-range jump. And we also have a code for the gizmo, so we will be able to visually see our box collider that covers inside of the scene view while we are developing our player. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and if you could, I would really appreciate if you could hit the like button and even consider subscribing.